Welcome to the HTML5 project training series. I'm Mike King, your host, and in this tutorial we're going to take our 3D Transforms Part 9 and expand upon that 3D carousel that we built in the previous tutorial. This is Part 9 of that series, and I believe it's probably going to be the last part we'll actually do. I think I'm going to wrap these up and try to get them posted online today. So we're going to expand upon the tutorial from the previous lesson and make our 3D carousel a little more functional. In this tutorial, we'll build a 10-slide carousel application using the 3D transforms that we've been studying over the last few tutorials. We'll add some additional information to our carousel slides to demonstrate some of the functionality that can be accomplished with these applications. And we're actually going to add some links and additional pages just so you can see how we can use these carousels as we move forward in our demonstrations. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and move into our development environment and demonstrate how we can actually add some additional functionality to our 3D carousel. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and minimize our presentation and get into our development environment. The first thing I want to do is I want to confirm that my Apache server is up and running, because we'll be using it in this demonstration. I want to go ahead and bring up Google Chrome, which will be the browser I'm going to be using for this demonstration, and Sublime Text 2, which will be my text editor that I'll be using. I do want you to notice that I actually have example_5.html. That's the file that we ended with in the last tutorial. We'll actually be starting with that file and the carousel.css file that we ended with in the last tutorial. Instead of starting everything from scratch, I figured we'd actually just add to those, make it a little bit easier for everybody involved. This way we're not starting all over. So in the previous tutorial, we built a carousel that had 5 panels and had a very little activity by the users. I mean, basically all we could do was scroll through it and read what we had on the panels. No actual interactivity at all. In this tutorial, we're going to take that a little bit further by building a 10-frame carousel and adding some interactivity to a few of the frames that you can see how. I want you to be able to see some of the possibilities of what we can do with these carousels in our websites or our web projects. The first thing we're going to do is load the completed file from our previous exercise. And I want you to go ahead and load up example_5 from the previous exercise. Hopefully you've completed that exercise. And then what I want you to do, I want you to go ahead and do a save as. Let's save this as example_6 inside our root folder for this particular exercise. Then I want to go ahead and load up example_6 so that we'll be actually making our modifications to that file. I also want you to go ahead and load up carousel.css from the previous exercise. Let's go ahead and do a save as. I want to save this as carousel_1.css, and again saved in that root folder. So I don't want to goof up the files that we created for the previous tutorial. I want you to be able to have those files so you can go back and refer to them. So this one we're actually going to start with example_6.html and carousel_1.css. The next thing we're going to do, we're going to need to update the link inside of our HTML file. So if you'll just go to the top head section of your document and add _1 to your link to the CSS file. That'll update that link. We're going to go back. We're going to refresh our browser. Let's make certain that we've got 6 loaded. We've got the updated CSS link, which we've updated right there to load _1.css, and make sure everything's functioning as it should be in that previous exercise. And once we've got that, we should be good to go. All right, so we're going to make some changes to our HTML document in order to do that so that we can actually support these additional slides. So the first thing I'm going to do, let's go ahead and change our title. That's actually in the head section of our document. I'm just going to go right up here and I'm going to go ahead and change my title out. 3D Carousel Application 10 slide demonstration. I want to go ahead and save those changes. Keep in mind it's in the head section. It's only impacting our tab inside our browser window. Go ahead and pause if you want to type that in. I just changed it to 3D Carousel Application 10 slide demonstration. The next thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and change that H2 text that's actually in our body section. So I'm just going to come right in here and change my H2 text. This is going to be Carousel 2, 10 slide carousel example. I'm going to go ahead and save those changes, refresh my browser window so you can see our new title in there. And then I actually need to add 5 additional div sections so that we can actually have additional slides. So I'm going to go ahead and add right below where I've got my div element right there, menu 5, I'm going to add 5 more div sections. Let me go ahead and clean up our formatting here. I'm going to go ahead and save all those changes. Let me scroll up a little bit. Good time to pause if you want to go ahead and type all those in. What we've done is we've added additional panels to the HTML, but until we update our CSS file, the panels will only be visible on the Z-plane of the carousel. In fact, actually, if we save all our changes and update our browser window, you'll actually see them. You can kind of see them back there on the Z-plane. Those other 5 panels are just kind of sitting there because we haven't done any CSS formatting with them. And now that you understand how that Z-translate works, they're just sitting there on that 0 axis, waiting for us to format them and spread them out across our carousel. Go ahead and minimize this or make this a little smaller. There we go. So that you can see those. All right, so we've got the panels now in the center of the carousel on that 0Z axis. We've completed the changes we're going to need for our HTML document. Now we're going to start working on that CSS file. All right, so continuing to March, next we're going to start working on some of the CSS changes that we need to make. First thing I want to do is let's go ahead and save this as example_7. So I'm going to do a save as example_7. It's going to be in our root directory. HTML. Now I want to go back and make certain that I load example_7 because that's what we're going to be working with from now on. This 7 example, we're actually going to start working in that CSS file. Make sure you've got your carousel_1.css file loaded in your text editor because that's the file we'll be making most of our changes to now going forward. So the first thing I want to do is inside our container element, I'm going to leave my body section alone. It's going to stay the same as it was for the previous exercise. But inside our container element, I want to make a few changes inside that element. The first thing I want to do is I want to change our width to 270 pixels. So I want a different width, and I'm going to change our height to 240 pixels. So we're actually going to make our panels a little bit bigger for this demonstration. My position is going to stay relative. I want my margin to be 0, auto, and let's change this to 40 pixels. I'm going to keep my border the same, but I do want to change my perspective. I want my perspective to be 1100. We're actually going to give it an increased perspective. If you remember from the earlier exercises, that actually kind of calms down the perspective. It actually widens out our perspective for our 3D elements inside of our container. So we're going to make that 1100 pixels. Go ahead and save those changes. Good time to pause if you want to need to type that in. Notice by changing the perspective, it has impacted the overall depth of our carousel. Let me go ahead and refresh our browser, and you can actually see now we've got much more depth in this carousel. I'm going to go ahead and expand it a little bit with that change of perspective. And we're doing that because we know we're going to add a bunch more panels. You can actually see now that we're going to make our panels larger. Don't worry about that because the panels will catch up as we get into their changes. But the size change impacts the view window. But we're going to fix that when we update the individual slides of our carousel. But you can see now by changing that perspective and by changing the width and height of the container itself, because we have that outline, you can see about how big our new panels are going to be once we start working through this. The next thing I want to do is I actually want to go ahead and change something in the carousel itself. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll up a little bit. And inside our ID carousel, I actually want to change one item. And I want to change our transform translate Z. And again, because we're making this larger, my translate Z is actually going to be larger. I want this to be -378. This is actually going to give us much more depth of field inside of our translate Z from our center point in and out. And in a few minutes, I'm actually going to go into a slide presentation and show you how I calculate that translate Z so that if you start building your own, you'll understand how to come up with these numbers that I'm using in this particular exercise. Since we're changing the perspective and the number of slides in our carousel, we'll need to update the translate Z setting for all of our slides. And again, like I said, I'll explain in a few minutes how I came up with this number. We're actually going to go through a little bit of a slide presentation as to how I did that. Good time to pause if you want to go ahead and type in those changes. The next thing I want to update is the carousel divs. So I'm going to scroll up just a little bit, and again, inside the carousel divs, we have some updates we need to make there. I want to change my width right here again, because you know that we've made our slides bigger. Let's change this to 246 pixels. I want to change this to 216 pixels for a height. And again, these were all calculated just based on what I was building. You can make these most anything you want. I want to pull out my line height because I'm going to do some stuff different here. I'm actually going to be adding some graphics to our panels. I want to have some additional text. I want to pull out that line height because I'm not going to so much go for now a centralized menu name. I'm actually going to add some text and graphics to some of these panels. So let's go ahead and pull out the line height. Let's go ahead and save all those changes. I'm going to go ahead and refresh my browser. And you can see now that we're starting to see our panels become a little bit bigger. By the way, you'll notice we still have all those Z stuff on our Z axis inside that center there. Good time to pause if you need to type those in. Now what I want to do is I actually want to start changing some of the translations that we have. Because since we're going to have 10 slides now instead of 5, we'll need to have our offset set a little bit differently. If you remember in our previous example, we had 5 slides. So I took 360 degrees and I divided that by 5, and that gave us 72 degrees. And that's what I did for the offsets here. And again, we're using those strictly for the colors, for the hues. But they really come into play down here where we have our degrees for our actual carousel circle. Since we're going to have 10 slides in this demonstration, now I want those to be 36 degrees. So the first thing I want to do, and again, the reason how I got that is I took 360 degrees and I divided it by the 10. So the first thing I want to do, let's go ahead and change our hues. So again, we're going to get different colors. So I'm going to have 36. Then I'm going to come down here and say 72. I'm going to come in here and say 108. And then I'm going to come right below that and I'm going to say 144. And all I'm doing is I'm adding 36 degrees to each one of those as I go in, starting with 0. So I'm going to go ahead and save those changes, refresh my browser window, and you'll notice now we've got a little bit different offset. But now what I want to do is I want to come down here and actually change inside my carousel itself where I actually have my degrees. So I'm going to come down here and make the changes to my degrees also. So I'm going to say 0. I want to go with 36. I want to go with 72. And again, I want to go with 108. And I want to go with 144. I want to go ahead and save those changes. And now you're going to notice a big impact when we actually update the browser window. We're actually going to have a significant impact on this because it's going to, it's actually going to make a big difference in the way we look at this because it's going to change the perspective of our current angles that we have of the 5 that we currently have up there. So let's go ahead and save all those changes and refresh our browser window. And you'll notice now we have our 5 slides and they're all kind of together, and then these other 5 are just kind of stacked in the center. And we haven't changed our Translate Z, and that's why you're seeing these funny overlaps. We're going to get to that in a few minutes. But I do want to get in there, so we'll get there very shortly. The next thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and add 5 additional elements. I'm going to go ahead and copy my elements up here so I can actually add those 5 additional slides. I'm just going to go ahead and paste this in place. So I have my child 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And we're going to come back to the bottom ones shortly. And you'll notice now I have my 144, 180, 216, 252, 288, 324. And I'm going to go ahead and set all of these to 0.8. I'm going to keep all my alphas at 0.8 instead of 0.9. I'm going to go ahead and save all those changes. Refresh my browser window, and now you can actually see now we've got our other slides set up now in the center. They now have their colors assigned to them because we set them in place. We just haven't set up their offsets. And we're going to do that in a minute. We're going to go ahead and set up their offsets. But I wanted you to see now that we've added our 5 additional slides. And again, based on how we've set these up here, remember how we use it nth child. I'm talking about div number 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And actually, that's how we've got them set up here. We have 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. But keep in mind, we're looking at the div. This number has nothing to do with that. It's the child. In other words, the 6th div child of Carousel. And this would just happen to be the 6th because it's my menu item number 6. And that's why we're using that nth child. So before we go any further, what I want to do is I want to drop back into the presentation for a minute and show you a few slides as to how I calculate this Translate Z, because we're actually getting ready to put those back in this new CSS file. And I want you to see how we come up with those numbers. so that if you decide to design your own carousel, you'll know how you can actually come up with these numbers based on how we actually do tangents in, it's basic trigonometry, how we actually calculate this number. So I'm going to show you how I came up with Translate Z, so you too will understand how to design your own carousels. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and bring back up our presentation, and let me explain how we actually calculate the Translate Z's to come up with these numbers that we're getting ready to put back in our CSS file for our new carousel. So calculating the Translate Z offset. First, we have this carousel that we built. It's got 10 sides to it and 10 slides. And our Translate Z is the center point that's inside. Keep in mind, we're looking at this from the top down. I'm looking at our carousel from the top down. These are the 10 slides that we're actually setting up now. So this is our carousel. We have 10 panels. Our angles are 36 degrees. So that's the angle here you're going to see in a minute. That's 36 degrees. And our panels are 246 pixels wide. We actually just set that up as we were putting together our CSS file. Now let's look at the outward shift, or how we calculate that Translate Z. But when we're creating the cube, so back in that previous tutorial when we created the cube, the translate value was simple to calculate, as it was equal to 1/2 the width, height, or depth of the object. So it was very, very easy to come up with a Translate Z, because if I had a 200 pixel cube, my Translate Z was 100 pixels, because my center point looking down at it would be 100 pixels in. So 100 pixels out would be my edges. With this carousel, there's no size we can automatically use as a reference. We'll have to calculate the distance by the shift, in other words, other means. Drawing a diagram of a carousel, we can see that we know only two things for certain. The width of each panel is 246 pixels, and each panel is rotated 36 degrees from the next. And there you see, we bring in the 36 degrees, that's our angle, and we have 246 pixel panel. If we split one of the segments down its center, we get a right angled triangle, perfect for some trigonometry. And that's exactly what I'm going to do to calculate this. I'm going to split one of my triangles, or one of my sections, right down the center, so I get this right triangle. We can determine the length of R, which is my red line, that's the length I'm looking for in this diagram, with a basic tangent equation. So again, here we go. I've got my 246 pixels. I've got my 36 degree angle. I want to get the length of R. So what I do is I pull that out, and I say, okay, I've got 18 degrees for half that angle and 123 pixels. So R equals 123 pixels divided by the tangent of 18 degrees. In this case, the tangent of 18 degrees is 0.3249. And 123 pixels divided by 0.3249, the Translate Z. In other words, from this point right here to the edge is 378 pixels. And that's where we're getting that number we're getting ready to enter into our CSS file. Again, if you purchase the tutorial, you'll have access to these slides. If not, send me an email if you need some help. I'll be glad to help you with doing this. It's basic trigonometry. And again, if you purchase the tutorial series, you'll actually have copies of all these slides and presentations. But this is how I actually calculate the Translate Z when I'm building my carousels. So let's get back into our development environment and finish setting up this 10-sided carousel. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and drop out of our presentation, get back into our development environment, and now we're going to get back into putting the rest of this together. So I'm going to take my current children that I have already in my CSS file, and the first thing I need to do is I need to update these degrees, which I've done, 36, 72, 108, 144, but I also need to update the Translate Z's. These need to be 378 as we just calculated in our presentation. So I need to change those to 378, every one of those, and that's going to push our slide out from that center point. So we're going to change those to 378, each one of them. And then I'm going to go ahead and save all these changes into my CSS file. I also want to go ahead and save this as example number 8. Let's do a save as example_8, even though we haven't made any changes to it in a little while. I'm going to go ahead and go in and refresh my browser. Let's go ahead and load up example 8. And you'll see now that our 5 slides that we currently have configured in our CSS file, now we've got them the correct size, They're filling up our window, and you can see now that our other 5 are kind of just sitting there in the center because we haven't set them up yet, and they're sitting at that 0 point for the Translate Z that we talked about just a few minutes ago. So now I'm hoping that that gives you a better understanding as to how we're setting all this up in 3-dimensional space. Okay, so what I want to do now is let's go ahead and add those other 5 slides to our example. And by the way, now would be a great time to pause if you need to go ahead and catch up and type this in, because what I'm getting ready to do now is I'm going to drop right down below this, and I'm actually going to put in the other 5 slides that we have. Child number 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, and that's going to pull those out into our circle and complete our carousel. And you'll notice now I went from 144 degrees to 180, 216, 252, 288, 324. We're adding 36 degrees to each one. And I've set my Translate Z at 378, just like we did, like we calculated it in our presentation. We set everything at 378 pixels. So we're coming out from that center point to the edge of our carousel. I'm going to go ahead and save all those changes. I'm going to go ahead and refresh my browser window. And that's going to complete our carousel. Now we actually have all 10 panels in our carousel. And again, I've got my opacity set at 0.8, so you can actually see through these. You can see the back to see what's going on in the back. We can actually make this a little larger so you can actually see the whole thing. But we actually have a very nice 10-panel carousel now. Now what I want to do is I want to take this a step further. I want to show you how we can add some additional HTML to make this really usable. We could actually use this as a navigation system inside of our web documents. All right, so let's go ahead and continue on with our demonstration. I want to go ahead and add some more functionality to this particular carousel application, because I mean, we've got the carousel working really well. I think you've got a good grasp now as to how these are built. Let's go ahead and add some additional functionality to this. So the first thing I want to do, I want to point out the directory structure inside of our web root for this particular demonstration. I want you to understand I have an images folder here, which has the images from the previous exercise that we'd used, because I'm going to be using some of those. And I also want to point out, because I don't think I made this exactly clear when we started, we're using those same JavaScript files that we'd used in that previous carousel. If you actually scroll down to the bottom of our page, you'll actually see we're still calling those JavaScript utilities. So again, you're going to need those for this carousel also. Not only do they help us navigate through the different slides, but that modernizer makes it work in almost all of our browsers. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is let's add a few more pages, because I actually want to do some navigation with this particular carousel. So in order to do that, we're going to have to add some pages. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new file. I'm going to go ahead and grab a basic HTML5 document, and I'm going to go ahead and save it in this new file. This is actually going to be called an HTML page. And I want to save this as htmlpage.html. I'm saving this in the root directory where all our other files are saved. I'm going to actually save this as html page.html, because I want to actually call this from within inside some navigation we're going to actually build in our carousel. So I'm going to go ahead and save that page. So now we've created that HTML page. Good time to pause if you need to type that in. Don't forget to bring back our reference also too, because we're going to be returning home. So make sure you type this reference in, this anchor tag, because that's going to allow us to actually get back to our carousel. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and save our example_8. Let's do a save as. I want to save this as example_9, because we'll be making some changes to it. And I want to go and load example_9. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and close out that HTML page. You should have it all typed in by now. I want to create another new file. And this new file is going to be very similar to what we just did on that one. Another basic HTML5 document. This is going to be called page 1. So I'm going to go ahead and save this as page1.html. And again, save that in the root of our web root for our particular file. It's in the same directory as our example_9. Good time to pause if you need to type that in. And I actually want to create one more. So I'm going to go ahead and close that file out. Let's go ahead and create one more new file. And again, it's a basic HTML5 document. Should be getting a lot of practice at creating these documents. And this is actually going to be my action script document. And again, it's just something I'm going to navigate to as I'm doing my demonstration. So I want to change this H2 to action script 3. I want to go ahead and save this as as3.html. Again, it's going to be one of the pages we're going to navigate to as we build this system. Good time to pause if you need to type that in. Excellent. So now we've got 3 additional pages that we've actually created inside of our web root. Right here, you can actually see those pages we created. We have that HTML page, our page 1, and our action script as3.html page. So they're all inside the same root structure as our example_9.html. So now I want to actually go into my example_9 and I want to make a change to this particular example. I'm going to go ahead and take this from my exercise file. And I'm going to replace my first div with this anchor tag. And I want you to notice that I've got an anchor tag, which has an href of page1.html. That's one of the pages that we just created. Then I have a div, and inside my div I've got page 1. I have my closing div tag, then my closing anchor tag. And the reason I set it up this way, that makes my entire div selectable. So the entire slide itself is selectable instead of just a piece of text that's on it. There's a bunch of different ways that you can do this. I just chose to do it this way because I want the entire slide to be selectable. I'm going to go ahead and save that change. Good time to pause if you need to type that in. I'm going to go ahead and update my browser, update my carousel. You'll notice it did change to page 1, and when I actually slide my slide now, you'll notice that when I hover over page 1, I actually get that interaction, that finger interaction, telling me that I can actually click on that page. And if I click on it, it takes me to that page 1 that we created. And then I can go back to home. It takes me back to that slide. So I've actually built a navigation link now between page 1 and the page1.html. It's actually taking me to that web page. So that's how you could actually set a carousel up as a navigation unit. And you'll notice that none of the other slides are doing that. It's just the page 1 slide that we set up that's interactive based on how we set up that div element. Keep in mind that inside these divs, you can put almost anything you want. Anything that's valid HTML code can fit inside those divs. In fact, you're going to see another demonstration we're getting ready to do. We're actually do a lot more than just put in an anchor tag. So let's go ahead and save all those changes. Let's go back to our carousel application. And let's come down to, I'm going to add some space in here. I want to get some space between div 5 and div 6, or menu 5 and menu 6. Because I'm going to go ahead and add some stuff inside my menu 5. So I'm going to take the menu 5 out. I'm going to scroll all the way down. And let's go ahead and add some additional information inside this. So inside that div element itself, I'm going to add an H3, and it's just to have HTML page. Then I'm going to have some paragraph text. I'm going to have 2 anchor. Let me make this a little bigger so it's not breaking, so it's easier for you to follow when you're typing it in. Then I'm putting 2 anchor tags that are actually going off to pages that we created, my HTML page we created, and an as3.html page that we created. And notice I actually have some image tags inside my anchor tags. So we're actually making the image the actual anchor link. 2 different links inside that same div with some paragraph text. Now what I want to do before we actually display this, let's go ahead and save those changes. I want to go add some CSS, because the way I've got the CSS set up right now, that text is going to be displayed way too large. If you go and look at it, I mean, it's going to be all goofed up. So what I want to do is I actually want to go in, there's our menu 5, by the way, where I actually put these in. I actually want to go in and do some formatting for those particular elements. So I'm going to go ahead and grab some formatting, and I'm going to come right to the bottom here, and I'm going to say I want to go to my carousel with a div that has a direct child of H3. And if you look, you'll see that we've got a div with a direct child of H3. And we're formatting that H3 element. We're giving it a font family, a font size, font style type, and a font align. I'm going to go ahead and save those changes, refresh my browser window, and when we come over, you'll notice that our H3 now has changed. It's become a lot smaller, something we can manage. I'm going to do the same thing. I want to add a little bit of formatting to my paragraph. So I'm going to go back into my CSS file, come down one line, and now I'm going to go into my carousel that has a div with the direct child, a paragraph or P tag. Let's go ahead and save all those changes. By the way, it's a great time to pause if you want to go ahead and type those in. I'm going to refresh the browser window, and now you'll notice that we've got some decent sized paragraph text, and I've got some decent images now inside my slide, inside that one particular menu slide that we set up inside that div element. Keep in mind that all this stuff is inside. This is that one div right there. We're formatting this just like we would format a normal div inside of our HTML documents. I can put anything in here that's going to fit inside there. And I actually have two valid links. So the last thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and add a little bit of formatting for my images. So I'm going to come right down below that paragraph, and I'm going to say carousel with a child div that has a direct child of anchor. So now we're actually looking right at those anchor tags because we have two of those in there. I'm going to save all those changes. Shouldn't see any difference in my presentation on the screen right now. But what I do want you to notice now, from this particular item, I can actually go to my HTML page, or I can go to that ActionScript 3 page. I have two valid anchors on here that are valid based on the images. So this was the ActionScript 3. Now watch when I go to the other one, it's going to be the HTML. That's the HTML. A lot of cool things that we can do with these carousels. Understanding how to use these transform properties in CSS3 adds so much to your toolkit as far as being a web designer. Understanding all the different properties that are now available with CSS3, there's some cool stuff that we can do. So I hope you enjoyed this 9-part series. It lasted a lot longer than I thought it would, to be honest. I mean, I knew it would be quite a few parts. I didn't realize some of them would be as long as they are. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you picked up a lot of good information from it. And I look forward to seeing you in our next tutorial. One thing I do want to point out as I wrap up this tutorial series, with the change to the codes in the modernizer, and you'll notice I actually put the MIT example code in here that we used for the carousel. I actually do want to give the credit where it should be, so I'm going to drop back into our presentation for one moment and go ahead and put up that information for that MIT license. I'd like to thank David DeSandro, again, with the MIT license for the software. This is the license that's actually involved with that. It does need to be a part of the series since we did use that code. I have made quite a few modifications to the code, but he was the source of the original code that I modified, and I wanted to make sure he got credit for that. So I look forward to seeing you all in the next tutorial, and I hope you enjoyed this. Any feedback on this particular tutorial series, I would be more than welcome. I would more than welcome the feedback. I'm kind of curious as to what you think about these new transform elements in CSS3.